Welcome, everyone. I'm Andrea Medeiros, Senior Director of Public Health and Policy of the Bone Health Osteoporosis Foundation. It's great to have you all joining us as we continue to learn and stay motivated to remain active, move, exercise safely to take care of our bone health. A reminder to please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. We encourage you to submit questions using the chat box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can following the presentation. Yes, this will be recorded and it'll be sent out in a follow-up email. Before I introduce our speakers for today, I'd like to encourage all of you to check out our free upcoming webinars on our events webpage found at bonehealthandosteoporosis.org on the tab News and Events. You can also find our new 40 Faces of Osteoporosis video series featuring individuals sharing their stories of having osteoporosis and living their best life. We'll be releasing one video per week. We'll send links to these in a summary email following today's program. I am pleased to introduce our guest speakers today. Joining us for this month's Steps to Strong Bones is Sarah Avery and Michaela Smith. Sarah Avery is a doctor of physical therapy, yoga therapist, and a 200-hour Yoga Alliance certified teacher. She created the first strength training for osteoporosis program of its kind in 2019 and has successfully helped over 100 patients maintain or improve bone density at her clinic. Michaela Smith is a yoga medicine therapeutic specialist, a NASM-certified personal trainer, nutritional therapy practitioner, and is the osteoporosis program director at Kari Prehab. Michaela is passionate about offering a safe and sustainable practice built around her clients' individual needs. Their presentation will focus on practical tips for strength training for osteoporosis to help demystify the basic principles of strength training for bone density. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen, which has the presentation. You see everything okay there?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Welcome, everybody. So as we have been introduced, we will be sharing some practical tips for strength training with osteoporosis today. And just a little reminder, if you could put yourself on mute if you aren't already, it just kind of helps with the listeners not getting any feedback. Thank you. And we can go ahead and move on to our introduction for today's presentation. So it sounds like you all have a pretty good understanding of what osteoporosis is because you are here in the first place. So osteoporosis, as you all know, is a condition characterized by weakened bones and increased fracture risk. And this affects millions globally. So the importance of strength training in osteoporosis is significant in managing and potentially reversing the effects of osteoporosis by enhancing your bone density. So the goal of today's presentation is to equip you with practical evidence-based tips for safely and effectively incorporating strength training into your osteoporosis management. All right, and then moving on to our next slide here. So just a little bit of, establishing some common ground for osteoporosis and a little bit about where we're coming from. So osteoporosis, as you all know, occurs when bone mineral density and bone mass decreases, or when the structure and strength of the bones change. This typically occurs with hormonal changes, aging, and lifestyle factors such as diet, physical activity, or alcohol use, many other factors. But on a physiological level, there is an imbalance of two types of bone cells, which are osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoblasts are cells that help lay down new bone, and osteoblasts are cells that help absorb bone. So in osteoporosis, the osteoclast activity, so the one that absorbs bone, is a little bit higher than the osteoblast activity, which causes an increased rate of free absorption in the bone, and that's what leads to the porous bones. The most common sites for this to happen are the low back, the hips, the long bones of the legs, with a higher fracture risk in these areas. And there is also some info out there about the wrists being heavily impacted as well in some people. This, of course, can be a critical health concern for older adults if this isn't addressed. So adequate bone density impacts health by preventing osteoporosis. Higher bone density reduces risk of osteoporosis and weak bones, reducing fracture risk. So strong bones lower the chance of fractures, especially in weight-bearing areas. Healthy bones support better posture and secondarily breathing, which is good for everybody, and also helps decrease your risk for falls. Good bone density preserves mobility and independence, maintaining that good physical function. And strong bones help avoid pain from fractures, especially in the spine and the pelvis. And lastly, higher bone density lowers the risk of fractures related to health complications. So this is that enhancing longevity aspect. And then common misconceptions and fears. So there is a belief out there that those who have osteoporosis should totally avoid exercise, when the opposite is in fact the truth. Safe loading and functional patterns is actually an effective treatment option for osteoporosis. So remember that we want to stimulate those bone cells that lay down new bone. And we want to do this at a higher rate than that bone is being absorbed. So this is done by putting a demand on those cells through strength training. And this leads us to our next topic on Wolff's Law.
Okay, so Wolff's Law is a principle that states that bones adapt to the stress that's put on them and become stronger from that stress and that adaptation. It's also really important to note here that lack of stress or lack of stimulus is also an adaptation, and it's a maladaptation. It causes a weakening of bones. Bones respond particularly well to compressive forces, meaning that we're kind of almost like smushing or putting weight onto the bones from the top down, which we are going to go into a lot of detail in very shortly. But it's important to think about that compressive load being the stress that we're looking for to stimulate that osteoblast activity and improve bone density. What's really important is that we're getting that sufficient loading, meaning that we're getting enough stimulus to the bones to trigger that response in the cells to lay down more tissue. And that is done through activities like resistance training and weight-bearing exercises.
Axial loading is one of our favorite conversation pieces here. So with Wolff's Law in mind, we want to be conscious of how and where you're loading. For example, if you lift weight with a rounded upper back, you can actually stimulate bone growth mostly in the front of the spine. So over time, this can cause bony outgrowths. Those are called osteophytes. You won't be tested on that. But that can eventually lead to compression fractures as posture continues to worsen over time. So how we load matters. And axial loading is the process of applying a force along the axis of the bone from the top down. This is done with good posture and is crucial for stimulating that osteoblast activity and laying down new bone in a pattern that we actually want to see. Now, axial loading or top-down loading is easiest to visualize with the spine and the hips. So anything that compresses these areas with load is considered top-down. Some examples are pressing dumbbells up overhead in a seated position or wearing a weight vest. So that's kind of pressing down. Additionally, holding weights down by your side adds compression to the spine. And this is also axial loading, even though the weight isn't physically above the spine. So hopefully you can visualize that. And you also see axial loading, say in the wrists and the forearms when you're in a planked position. So kind of in that like push-up position with hands on the floor, you're getting that force generated up through the wrists. So these are just some examples of how we integrate axial loading into our programming. It's important to address the common fears surrounding load-bearing exercises because we all have them. Am I doing it right? Am I choosing the right exercise? Am I progressing safely? These are all valid questions. And with proper guidance, these exercises are safe and beneficial, which brings us to our next slide about common myths surrounding this topic.
Okay, so we get a lot of communication from our clients or students about a fear of loading, of wondering if it's actually safe to add load to bones that are weak or porous. And what we need to think about in this context is that we're loading in the correct way. And again, that is looking at posture, choosing exercises that are effective and safe, and making sure that you are strength training in a way that encourages that bone growth in the places we want to see it. And we want to really emphasize that because of that Wolff's Law, that stress stimulates the growth of bones, strength training is not only safe, but actually a necessary part of your osteoporosis management. And on top of that, strength training has many other benefits, such as building more functional strength and mobility that's going to increase your independence and your quality of life through having more freedom in your daily activities. When we think about kind of building this safe and effective practice, we want to just start by building some confidence. So that can look like starting body weight or very lightweight until you get the proper movement mechanics and build up that sense of safety and confidence in the movements themselves. And then from there, slowly progress into heavier weights as you build up that sense of comfort in the routine. Of course, we always want to focus on efficacy. So we're not just strength training kind of without a goal in mind, especially when we're thinking about osteoporosis, but really targeting those areas that Sarah mentioned, the low back, the femurs, the long bones of the legs, and just really making sure that we're targeting the correct areas to really get the adaptations that we're looking for. And then we can always kind of work on this combination of efficacy and comfort, where we start lighter, we build that comfort. And then once you have that baseline, now we can start to increase the weight, add a little bit more impact exercises to get that same compressive force through the body, and start to kind of bump up the efficacy of your practices. This brings us to progressive overload. Progressive overload is really that, it's like a fancy term for how that we build up that confidence and maintain that continued adaptation. So many times people hear the term overload and they wonder if that's safe, like should you really be overloading your body? And the answer is it just means that you're overloading what you have become capable of. So you're just going a little bit beyond that comfort, what is now not adapting anymore. And now you're loading it again to stimulate that adaptation again. So don't kind of focus on the term overload and really just think about progressively training to stimulate adaptation. So what that means is that we are gradually increasing the weight or resistance that we're using in an exercise to continue to challenge the muscles and the bones, because we always adapt to the input that we're putting in. The role that plays in bone mineral density and kind of avoiding plateaus is that if we're not giving enough stimulation, there's not going to be a reason for the bones to lay down more tissue. There needs to be enough of a stimulus that tells your bones that you need to get a little stronger in case she keeps doing this. So you need to lay down, you need to increase the challenge to be able to keep that stimulus going. The way that we implement this safely is by monitoring what we call RPE, or perceived rate of exertion, and rate of perceived exertion. And what that really means is just how hard does the exercise feel? And we want to make sure that the exercise feels challenging. So when you're strength training, it shouldn't be easy. You shouldn't be able to kind of keep going and have a conversation. You want to feel like you are challenging yourself, but at the point where you can still breathe and maintain good form. So if you are exercising and you're finding that it's not challenging you enough, then you might need to increase the weight or increase the reps. We increase those in small increments. So we're not making big jumps. Little jumps over time yield really big results. And then just making sure that the reps and the form are in alignment with your goals. So again, just making sure that that challenge is meeting up with your goals.
Okay, so when we built out our programming, we really wanted to make sure that every exercise served a purpose and fell into at least one of three categories, which are axial loading, balance, and posture. These are all essentials when considering exercise for osteoporosis. So, why balance and posture are important components. So, with osteoporosis, it's equally important to consider balance and posture. We want to reduce the risk of falling by improving balance, which we all know our balance systems weaken over time. So, by continuously strengthening those systems, we're reducing the risks of fractures related to falling. Additionally, working on posture via chest opening, breathing, and back body strengthening exercises, or that posterior chain, the back of the body, we can reduce the risk of compression fractures in the mid and low back because we're avoiding that rounding that I discussed before. Yoga also helps to target both of these deficiencies. So we have also included that as an essential part of the program. And the nice thing about yoga is that you're also, in addition to that compressive loading that you get with strength training, you're also getting what's called tensile loading. So if you think of your bicep muscle, you have the insertion at the elbow and above the shoulder. So when you use an external force like a weight to do a bicep curl, you're actually pulling the tendon on the bone, and that's stimulating bone growth too. So when you're stretching and finding stability in those yoga poses, you're getting those benefits as well. The recommended frequency depends on, and this is of strength training, depends on the amount of resistance that you're using. So if you're lifting really heavy, you might only need to do 2 to 3 times a week to see those benefits. And if you're lifting a little on the lighter side, then 4 to 5 times a week might be more beneficial. So it's just kind of finding that that balance and just seeing where you're at with the level of resistance that you're using. Intensity is based on RPE. This is always a tongue twister, so I'm right there with you, Michaela. It's rate of perceived exertion. So if you are able to continue a conversation, you might not be challenging yourself enough. However, if you are having difficulty breathing or saying anything, or you're feeling maybe dizzy or faint, which would be way on the other end of the spectrum, you might be working a little too hard. So we want to find that sweet spot in the middle of those two extremes. The types of exercises to incorporate in brief would be yoga poses, like we just mentioned, balance exercises, and weight bearing exercises that load the spine and the long bones, the body. We want to avoid loading while rounding the spine and intense twisting, especially under load. So in yoga, we get questions a lot about, seated spinal twists or cat cow. Those movements are fine. You're not going to have a fracture by doing those movements, but it's really, forcing those end ranges and stressing the bones when you don't need to. Okay. And especially if you have weight and you're doing those movements, that's where it gets a little more risky. So remineralization of bone, this is a common question we get, and we're still learning more and more about this. So from what we know right now, it takes 6 to 8 months for bone matrix to be created. So all that wonderful stuff that starts flowing through the bone cells, and then it takes an additional 2 to 4 months for that bone matrix to mineralize and harden. This means that it could take up to a year or more to see any changes. So with that in mind, consistency is the key when it comes to exercise. And that's not touching on the discussion of like sleep and diet and stress and any endocrine issues that might play a role in that amount of time. We will offer a demo and a few slides to show you some of the foundational movements that might be incorporated into an exercise program for osteoporosis. And this is where we'll show some axial loading, posture, and balance movements. Okay.
So I can stop screen sharing so that you guys can see me, and then we'll come back into our presentation slides in just a moment here. So let me stop the screen share. And then just make sure that you can see my screen. So I'm Michaela. And then Sarah's going to talk you through some of our favorite, most effective exercises while I demo.
Okay, so when we were going through these, we thought it would be fun to just kind of demonstrate that concept that I was discussing earlier as it relates to axial loading. So all of these movements will be axial loading. We're just showing you how the different forces can play and the positions of the weights. Okay, so Michaela has a set of dumbbells there. She's going to demonstrate we're going to go for an overhead press. So pressing the dumbbells up overhead. This is kind of an easy one to visualize. So if you can kind of go through a few repetitions of an overhead press. So she's pushing that weight up overhead. And what we're looking at is that end position where she's stacking the wrists over the shoulders right now. That's really nice loading through the spine. You can see it goes straight down. So that's one way that we can axial load not only the shoulders, but the spine and the hips. So next is going to be a goblet squat. So she's just going to drop one weight, maybe turn to face us so that we can see that handhold position and hugging that nice and close to the chest. Then if we see this from a side view, you can see that when she comes down into her squat position, that even though the weight is in front of her, we're still getting that force being generated down through the hips, down through the spine. And then as she pushes up back to that standing position, we can really see that here. Okay, so keeping that nice and close to the chest for that one is something we encourage in the programming. All right, and then next we have a farmer's carry. So this is one of our favorites because you can really increase the weight that you're carrying with this. This is also a super functional exercise because we're carrying our groceries in, or carrying bags in from our workday down by our side. So adding in a farmer's carry where we're advancing forward, bracing through the core. We're also tuning into that postural stability, so chest opening. And even though those weights are down by her hips, she's feeling that force that being generated up through the shoulder girdle, and it's actually pressing down on those vertebrae and it also being distributed through the hips. Okay, so that's a nice way to see that even though the weight is down below, you're still getting those same axial loading benefits here. Hopefully Michaela isn't getting too tired here. She's strong. She's got this. And then next and pretty interesting are our reverse lunges. So you could choose to hold weights with this or not. So the reason we wanted to demo this one is just to show you that even though she's doing this exercise on one side, she's still getting axial loading, but the axial loading is actually happening more in the hip. So by shifting the weight over to one side and stepping back, most of her weight stays on her front leg. She is actually getting that force being generated through the hip. And of course, the more weight you add, the more loading that happens with this one. All right. So that one's a pretty interesting one to just demonstrate how, we can transfer that force to the hips. All right. And then our next one is going to be plank. So we wanted to show you this as a way to show you that you can load through the wrists and forearms, which can also be impacted by osteoporosis. Okay. So even though, yes, it's a great posture and core strengthening exercise, you can see that where the wrist is bending here is actually allowing the force from the ground to come up through the wrist and the forearm. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So here we could add weight by placing a 10-pound plate on your back. We wouldn't have you do that, of course, in the videos, but I'm just showcasing how we could make this a little more challenging. All right. Nice job, Michaela. And then that does wrap up our demo. If anybody has questions about those, I see some questions coming in that we can address toward the end of the session. But I do want to touch on a common question that we get often. And that's ankle and wrist weights. Are you still getting those benefits with ankle and wrist weights? And it has been brought to our attention that some PTs will prescribe this. And it's not something that, I really agree with, because the load for osteoporosis needs to be close to the part of the body that you're trying to stimulate. So notice in the goblet squat, we had that hugging close. Farmer carry, we had that nice and close to the central line of the body. When you take wrist weights, you're sending them out to the periphery, so outside of that center point of your body, and they're just kind of hanging down by your sides or down by the ankles, and you're really not getting that top down stimulus in the spine, the hips, or frankly the wrists. And the force is actually going in the opposite direction. So hopefully that concept makes sense. Ankle and wrist weights are great for strengthening. I'm not saying this to discourage you from using them, but if you're using those solely as a way to improve bone density, there are other options that might be a little more effective for you. Okay. And we wanted to put a little case study in here to show some of the great success that has been happening with doing these movements, to give you a little encouragement and know that it is possible to actually change bone density with strength training. So Lori, who was in one of our cohorts recently, well, I guess she started quite a bit ago. Time is certainly flying, but Lori discovered that she had osteoporosis and was pretty surprised by this, being a pretty active individual. So she committed to improving her bone health with a combination of medication, hormones, and she had 100% adherence, or pretty darn close to it, for the strength training program. And the adherence is important to note because, yes, you can do the program, but if you're not participating at the rate at which we're prescribing, or any weightlifting, then you might not see those changes. And that is worth noting, because if you are going to put in the time and the commitment to it, you might as well go all in and get the maximum benefit from that. But Lori's 1-year results, so in the lumbar spine, she noticed a 20% improvement in the lumbar bone mineral density. So from her previous year, she went from -4.5 to -3.5. So that's kind of inching her closer to that 0 on the scale. So that's kind of a good direction that we're headed. And then in the femoral neck, so that long bone that connects the femur to the ball joint of the hip, she had a 15% improvement. And her previous year, she went from a -2.7 to a -1.9. And then lastly, her total hip bone mineral density was that 13.2% improvement. So going from -2.7 to -2.0. And the radiologist did indeed confirm that there has been significant improvement. So significant is the key word there. And then Lori just goes on to state that the strength training program has been a big influence on this progress and her outlook on life with osteoporosis, which was, that's the best part of this testimonial, is the outlook on life, because it's not just the physical that happens with this diagnosis. It's all the other stuff that comes along with it, anxiousness and uncertainty. So that was really nice to hear for Lori. And while medication and supplements helped, the results wouldn't have been as stellar without strength training. Let's see how much more density we can gain. Game on. And I love her motivation there.
Okay, so one thing we wanted to talk about was just some common pitfalls and how we can avoid them. So some challenges you might come across with strength training, where you might not get the adaptations that you're looking for, is improper form, inadequate loading, neglecting other forms of exercise, and then just having that confidence and comfort in knowing what you're doing. So to help avoid making these mistakes, we really do suggest that you seek some professional guidance from someone who has experience and training working with people with osteoporosis. We highly recommend creating a structured routine so that you get that adequate loading. And then finding time for other activities you love, which we love strength training, but we know that it's not everyone's favorite thing. So we want you to also do the things that bring you joy, whether that's pickleball, kayaking, running, the things that make you really happy. When it comes to the improper form and the inadequate loading, we really want to think about that posture. And then again, just thinking about everything we've talked about with the axial loading, making sure that we're getting sufficient loading, which is where seeking professional help can really be a useful tool to ensure that you're getting good form and good loading. And then one thing that we do really love about our program is that it creates a community. So as we've touched on a few times here, there's just a lot of uncertainty. Oftentimes when people get this diagnosis of osteoporosis, they feel like a lot is taken from them. They're told not to do the activities they love anymore. It can feel really isolating and scary. And when you have a community that not only kind of understands this, but is actively living it with you and then taking the same kind of active steps as you to work through those challenges, it can be really uplifting in so many different ways and make it much easier to stick with your training as well. And one thing with committing to strength training is that it is a lifelong commitment if this is the route that you want to take to support your bone health. So having a community and support from a professional can really make that long-term commitment much easier. And then just our little recap here of the program or our presentation is just that we really want you to understand these key points, which are that the bones respond to the stress placed on them to become stronger. They respond particularly well to compressive forces, meaning that strength training is a key component to managing osteoporosis because it applies that compressive force on the bones. We really want to make sure that we're doing that through targeted exercises to get the results we're looking for. We want to include balance and posture to make sure that the program is well-rounded and touching on as many aspects of osteoporosis that we can. And that with proper progression, strength training is an effective way to improve not only your bone health, your bone density, but also your quality of life. And then if you want to get in touch with us, here's our contact information. I'll just give you a moment to take a picture or jot that down. And we are happy to put that in the chat, and it will be in the follow-up email as well. And then lastly, we just wanted to share that we have some upcoming program start dates, and you can scan this QR code here if you want to get taken directly to the website for some more details. So I'll give you just a moment to do that. And then we're going to open the floor up for Q&A. So I saw some questions flooding in into the chat box, and we love talking about these. So I'll just give you one more moment, and then we'll answer your questions. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Michaela and Sarah. So our first question was from Mary. I am limited on lat pull downs beyond about 50 pounds because the weight is too much for my fingers. What are tips for continuing to load appropriately to avoid my plateau? Also, what more times per week at the gym? Will you speak about safe stretches and how frequently to do those?
So I can touch on the grip strength, and that's honestly something that we see in our programs too, is the grip strength honestly being the factor that is limiting. So we could suggest doing some grip strength training. So those like stress balls are really nice to get that grip going. If you have access to a pull-up bar, don't go buy one, but you can hang from the pull-up bar. Just as long as your shoulders and elbows feel safe and comfortable there. And then the farmer carry is actually a really great one that we showed you. As you start to increase your weight there, you can easily put those weights down. So if it's too much, you can just kind of put them down safely on the floor. And then hopefully that carries over to your other weightlifting activities. And then go ahead, Michaela.
Oh, that's okay. So I was just going to say, as far as how many times per week, it really just depends on how much you're loading. So there's kind of like two bodies of research with osteoporosis and loading. And The one that you hear a lot is that 70 to 80% of your 1 rep max. So that's quite heavy for most people. And with that, you would want to train about 2 to 3 days a week. If you're not having access to weights that you can lift that volume, or you don't have a coach who can be there to support you in proper form and learning those movements, and you're using more of like a home gym approach with dumbbells, and your loads are lighter, we would suggest 4 to 5 days a week. So it kind of just depends on exactly what you have access to and what your training regimen looks like. But that'll vary from kind of like 2 to 5 days a week-ish. And then as far as safe stretches go, mostly we just want to avoid extreme ranges of motion in flexion. So that's that rounding of the spine, and twisting. You're still okay to do cat-cows, just do them with the mindset of just gentle movement to encourage that fluidity in the tissues, that movement going into the joints and the discs of the spine, not so much to round as much as you can. And then same goes with the twist. So feel free to twist, but don't crank yourself into a twist. And do them however often feels good for you. I mean, I think a little bit of stretching every day is beneficial. It doesn't have to be a big routine. 10 minutes just to move your body is really helpful for people. Do you have any other safe stretches, Sarah?
No, I mean, we could probably talk about that a lot, but
Yeah.
I think you did a great job.
Could take the whole Q&A to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Another question came in. What amount of weight in dumbbells should he start with?
Really depends on the exercise and the person. So for maybe for the farmer carry, you might see that you could do a little bit more load than you could an overhead press, because the muscles of the upper body, well, that's a bad example. You might be able to do more with the squat than the overhead press, because the muscles of the lower body are a lot bigger and can tolerate more forces than the upper body. But anywhere, yeah, like I said, it really depends on the movement, but it's always safer to err on the side of caution, start lighter. And if you're feeling like you're just not getting enough load, just bump it up a little bit. So it's that incremental progression to where you feel some resistance, but it's not causing any discomfort.
When you're doing the demos, someone had a question about modifications for those people who have osteoarthritis in both their knees.
Yeah. So modifications with cranky knees, we see that a lot actually in this population. It's not unheard of for the two diagnoses to occur together. Osteoarthritis actually loves movement though. So the more you're kind of moving those joints, the more synovial fluid that starts to flow between the joint surfaces. And then it kind of nourishes the joint surfaces so that you ultimately feel better. I know there's some limitations there if you have like bone spurs or other pathologies that go along with that, but generally speaking, the osteoarthritis symptoms should feel a little bit better with the movement. However, going the other way, if you do have limitations in your movement and you're feeling discomforts throughout range of motion, say in a squat or a lunge, we would just make that movement a little more shallow, so you're not going through that full and aggravating range of motion. Do you have anything to add on to that, Michaela?
Yeah, I would say something we do a lot too with cranky knees and lunges is we just try to make the movement feel safer. So that could be holding on to the back of a chair as you do your lunges. So that way you don't have to fight for balance quite as much and you just feel a little bit more stable. Sometimes that can give you access to maybe a little bit more range of motion, or it can just give you that stability that you need to take some of that stress off the knees as well. But usually we will work with the modifications all the time. And we can always figure out something, whether it's just making the movement really small, adding in that support, or if it's just absolutely not agreeing with your body, we find something that has a similar benefit, but works with your body. So something like a forward step up where you're still loading one leg at a time. but sometimes that might feel a little bit better just depending on the person.
And then we had two questions about the planks. One person mentioned, I always thought the plank had bent elbows. Does that take away from the axial force? And the other question related there is the forearm plank beneficial?
Yeah, well, there's the full plank with the elbows extended, and that's where you're really getting a lot of that force generated through the wrists and the long bone of the forearm. If you drop down to the elbows, it's still a very great version of the plank. You're just not getting that loading through the wrist, and that's being now transferred through the elbow up to the shoulder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if we can really like like beat that axial loading idea into you guys, if you can really think about, when you're thinking in a plank, if the weight is coming this direction, we're loading into the wrist there. Whereas if we take that wrist away and now we're on the elbow, this isn't getting any load, it's just hanging out on the floor. So if you can really just picture like, where is the direction of gravity going through? When you drop to your elbows, it's no longer meeting the wrist.
Someone asked about, what about tree pose holding weights?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We love tree
Yeah.
pose. I mean, if you can do that safely, I think, safety is across the board the number one priority for any of these. But yeah, it might actually help a little bit with that loading through the single leg, depending on where you're holding that to. You could get it through wrists, if you're holding down by your side. Yeah, I say that would be fine if you can do it safely.
What are best exercises to build bone density in the spine?
That is a loaded question.
Yep.
Well, this is also a generalization, and you really should be guided through these movements with a professional if you don't have any experience with them, especially if you do have a diagnosis of osteoporosis. But the literature says overhead presses, squats, deadlifts, and we have also incorporated other movements like bench press variations. And then also the list goes on as you get into postural exercises and balance exercises. So it's not like a one list answer. We do have some for life exercises, which are actually on the demo that we will be sharing after the discussion here. Anything else to add on there, Michaela? I know that's another one we could talk about probably all day.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we loading through the spine again, we just want to kind of bring it back to that idea of like where is the weight coming from and going through. So that idea of axial loading again, overhead presses, we're putting the weight above us, we're getting that weight coming down. So anything that's placing a compressive force from the top down through the spine is going to be very effective for osteoporosis and getting that loading into the spine. So there's like honestly so many exercises and so many variations of exercises. And I think that's the key, is that there's a lot of variations. So there's lots of variations of overhead press, lots of variations of squat and deadlift, but really those are like the key umbrella exercises that we're using. And then we are taking pieces of those or variations of them and weaving them into the program.
What about Pilates instead of yoga? So I'm assuming if it's the benefits of both.
We get the question about Pilates a lot. And I'll just say that I don't have as much experience with Pilates myself. But one thing I do know is that Pilates emphasizes a lot of rounding of the spine, especially when you're on the reformer. You're loading that rounding. So I would just be mindful of your position and having a conversation with your teacher. I think Pilates is a great exercise routine. I would just be mindful of that flexion in Pilates that is often taught. And Sarah, do you have any opinions on that one?
Yeah, I mean, Pilates is excellent. I agree very much with the rounding, and when you are on the reformer, especially or on the tower, you are loading. So not only are you in flexion, but you're also you have external resistive forces. So we just want to be careful there. Especially mat Pilates, I know is great for core activation, which helps to protect the lumbar spine. And it also helps to add stability around the hip joint. So if we're going for strength training and tensile loading there, it's a great option. We're just, yeah, we kind of went the yoga route, and there's benefits to both, certainly.
What about higher risk activities like snow and water skiing, biking, and golf?
This is so I like Michaela was saying earlier, and I did notice a question about pickleball. The activities that you participate in are heavily they rely heavily on the individual and the severity of the osteoporosis. So if you have just some examples, if you have really low bone density and very poor balance, you might want to reconsider something else that kind of fills that cup. Or a similar activity that might be a little less risky, or maybe if it's skiing, you're not going up moguls and down black diamonds. You might consider just doing like a um, easier trails to kind of manage the safety around that. Um, and then but if you have low, like more toward the osteopenia range and your balance is excellent, I would say that that places you at a lower risk for having falls and then fractures related to falls. So it really does depend heavily on the individual, and that is a difficult question to answer directly, but maybe you have a different take, Michaela.
No, I would say, knowing what your like individual risks are, which is what Sarah was like touching on. And just, I think understanding your risks and kind of making your own decision based on that. But just knowing that with that low bone density, if you're doing a particularly balanced, challenging exercise, like you are placing yourself at risk, and then just deciding if that's worth it. But no, like know the variables at hand, know know the risk, and then kind of either fill it with another activity that kind of scratches the same itch, or you might need to take it out of the equation if it's a little too risky.
Okay, next is how many reps and sets should we do? Is it better to increase the number of reps or increase the amount of weight first?
So reps and sets is really going to depend on how much weight you're lifting. So that's a little bit hard to answer directly, but generally speaking, if you're using weights that are on the lighter side, so more like dumbbells or kettlebells, like more of a home gym kind of situation, you'll probably do a few more of either or both. So a few more reps or a few more sets to get that sufficient loading into the bones. Whereas if you're using like a barbell at a gym, you'll likely do less reps, less sets. This also depends on your physical fitness. So how long you've been strength training, how comfortable with it you are, what's your level of adaptation to it. As you become more adapted, then you can increase that challenge. You need to, that progressive overload, we need to make sure that we're still stimulating the bones enough. And then remind me of the second half of that question. I apologize.
1 second.
Sorry.
I have to find
Is it better to
It's
increase
better
the
to
number?
increase reps first or the weight?
Oh, thanks. I would say generally speaking, the weight if you can. But something we do in our program is we kind of give people a little bit of leeway in this, where you're working at your home, you don't always have access to like a nice wide variety of dumbbells, and sometimes there's a gap between when you can get the next heaviest dumbbell. So if you're in that situation where you don't have access to it, but you're doing overhead press and it's feeling easy at the prescribed 8 reps, then I would recommend continuing until you start to hit that challenge point, that kind of like place where you're feeling a little bit more fatigue and challenge. What do you think, Sarah?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't really have anything else to add on to that.
Okay, this is related to gyms. So what specific machines are safe to use in the gym? Do you recommend working on machines in the gym for this type of strength training? I guess this is related to the demo earlier, or type of training. Yeah.
I mean, if that's all you have access to are machines, of course, but the machines are on a pulley system, so you kind of have like a fail safe there, where you don't necessarily need to control the weight on the way back. Where with free weights, you are in control through the entire movement, and it requires you to recruit more of that core stability, and that plays a role in that functional movement aspect. So we want to mimic what you're doing in your everyday life. So you don't have a lot of external support like you would on a machine in everyday life. So we're kind of trying to train for life, right? And then that it's called the eccentric phase of a movement. So that controlled lowering down. So if you're doing a bicep curl and you're lowering the weight back down to that start position rather than on a machine, you can just kind of let it go. Where with the weight, you're getting that controlled movement, and that helps with that tensile loading that I was talking about to stimulate that bone growth. So in my opinion, doing the free weights would be a little more beneficial, but machines are you're still getting benefits, of course, if that's what you have access to. So don't stop doing those if it's what you're doing.
What is the safest way to pick up the weights, say 2 dumbbells, to start the farmer's walk? Should you squat to pick them up if you have osteoporosis?
Yeah, why don't I do a little demo because they're right here. So we always really harp on the squat pattern and the hinge pattern. I'm just going to take my cardigan off so you can see my movements a little bit better here. So 2 ways to pick stuff up is either by squatting down. So that means that the hips are going in a back and down direction. So I'm sitting them back and down like I would if I was reaching for a chair. And then of course my weights are low. I stepped a little too far back, but I would squat down, pick them up and come back up. And what that accomplishes is that my spine stayed nice and straight. It stayed in neutral when I picked up them versus I'm going to do what I wouldn't want you to do if you had osteoporosis, which be to kind of round forward. I'm getting all this flexion in the spine. I'm adding that external load and then I'm coming back up. So we wouldn't want to see that. If your range of motion makes it hard to squat down all the way to pick up a weight, you can also do what is called a hinge. So instead of the hips going in a back and down pattern, they're going more in a straight back and forward pattern. So hips go back, my spine stays nice and long here, and then I can bend my knees a little bit to get down to those weights and come back up. But notice how different that was than the rounding forward. My spine stays nice and long as I send my hips back to set the weights down or pick them up. So those would be this 2 movements. So again, squat, hips go down and back, grab your weights, or hinge, hips go back, chest lowers, but the spine stays long to pick those weights up. You can also keep your weights on a higher surface if that range of motion challenges you. So you could set them on a chair or a desk or a shelf if that works better for you. Any questions before I come away from my mat?
Well, earlier they wanted you to demo the first 2 exercises again.
Sure.
We have a little bit of time for that.
Okay. So first exercise was just an overhead press. So weights are by your side and you're just pressing them straight overhead, keeping a nice long spine. Obviously you can see here, this is like the best example of axial load because we have that weight coming from the top down. So that was overhead press. You would do it in repetition. You wouldn't just hold them up there like I did. And then the second exercise we did was a goblet squat. So holding the weight like a goblet between your palms there, nice and close to your chest. And then that same back and down movement of the hips and back up. The weight's at the front, but it's still creating that load down through the spine and the pelvis.
That was great, thank you. And actually related to the overhead press, there was a question asking, I thought overhead presses were too stressful for the rotator cuff of the shoulder. Is that true?
Generally speaking, you know, overhead presses are a safe exercise to build strength in the rotator cuff. So this is one of those questions where I hesitate to say that because every person is individual. If you have injury or you're having discomfort doing overhead presses, you know, if you were in physical therapy and your physical therapist told you that, it might be the case that for you specifically, it might be a little too much stress right now. But in the past, we have had people come in with shoulder issues and gradually work their way up to doing an overhead press. So that's one of those situations where we would kind of assess that and then we could modify that. So that's the nice part about the way that this is structured, is that we can create special modifications for you for a particular type of exercise if it were not feeling good for you or was unsafe.
I think we have time for one last question, which is, are there any stretches to do before using dumbbells?
Yeah, I mean, it would be dependent on what type of workout you're getting ready to do and what the restrictions are. So for example, the example of the overhead press, you know, it's hard to say because the shoulder complex is so dynamic. There's like 17 muscles that attach to the shoulder blade, and then like, you know, so it's really dependent on where the restriction lies. So yes, you can, but I would need to kind of dig into more of the specifics of what is restricted to prescribe a stretch, if that makes sense. But we do a general, like, you know, warm up, total body warm up, just to get blood flow and get things moving, so that the tissues move a little bit better going into some resistance training. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I was just going to say, like, making sure that you're taking the joints through a nice full range of motion to prepare them to load in that range. And then I always kind of treat my first set as a little bit of a warm up as well. So I usually start my first set on the lighter side to kind of prepare the muscles, the joints, and my nervous system of what's going to be asked of it. And then from there, that kind of you can increase the load and challenge it for your sets.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. So thank you again to Sarah and Michaela for joining us and helping demystify strength training. In our follow-up email to everyone, we will include links to the resources shared during today's session, including the recording. And on behalf of the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at some of our other upcoming events. Our next Steps to Strong Bones session will be on Monday, October 7 at 12 p.m. Eastern. And until then, we wish you the best of luck and health. Thank you.
Thank you.